The dust motes danced in the slivers of light piercing the saloon's gloom, each particle a silent witness to the sordid spectacle unfolding. On a makeshift stage, Titus Blackwood, a man whose shadow seemed to stain everything it touched, presented Ilara. She was young, barely a woman, terror etched onto her fine features, yet a defiant fire flickered deep within her eyes, a spark refusing to be extinguished by the oppressive fear. The air, thick with the cloying aroma of cheap liquor, stale sweat, and avarice, hung heavy, a predatory silence gripping the room as Blackwood's gravelly voice boomed, a rare flower, gentleman, untouched, pure as the driven snow. Bidding starts at 500-inch lewd calls and jeering laughter echoed from the assembled crowd of rough-hewn miners and leering opportunists. Silas, nursing a watered-down whiskey in the darkest corner of the grimy establishment, watched, his face an unreadable mask. He'd seen this scene before, in countless other towns, with different faces, different names, but the rotten core was always the same: innocence brutalized by greed, vulnerability preyed upon by the strong. His gut clenched, a familiar knot of cold fury and bitter regret. The ghosts of his past, the haunting faces of those he couldn't save, whispered their melancholic accusations in the recesses of his mind. He had come to this dusty, God-forsaken town, a forgotten speck on the barren map of the territory, seeking oblivion, not another war, not another soul to carry on his conscience. But oblivion, he was learning, was a fickle mistress, always eluding his grasp. He thought of Maria, her laughter silenced too soon, a vibrant life extinguished because he hadn't been fast enough, strong enough. He had failed her. He wouldn't fail again. He pushed back his chair, the sudden, sharp scraping sound cutting through the charged atmosphere like a whip crack. Every eye in the saloon swiveled towards him. His worn duster, hanging loosely on his lean frame, the low-slung holster with the butt of a Colt peacemaker visible, the network of faded scars etched onto his weathered face, all spoke of a life lived on the razor's edge, a life intimately familiar with violence and loss. Blackwood, momentarily startled, recovered with a sneer. Well, well, what have we here? Another vulture circling, hoping for scraps. Silas's voice, when it came, was low, a dangerous rumble that promised thunder. She's not for sale. He moved with an unnerving stillness, placing a heavy leather pouch on a nearby table. The clink of coins was unmistakable. That's 1,000, he stated, his voice devoid of emotion. More than any of these curs will bid for her. For her freedom, not her servitude. The saloon went dead silent, the previous hubbub evaporating into stunned disbelief. Blackwood's eyes narrowed into slits, his hand inching towards the ornate Colt peacemaker tucked into his waistband. Silas didn't flinch. His gaze, cold and hard as glacial ice, locked onto Blackwood. He wasn't just buying a girl, he was buying a fight, a confrontation he knew was inevitable. And maybe, just maybe, he was buying a sliver of redemption he so desperately craved. He saw the flicker of hope, instantly veiled, in Ilara's eyes, but he saw it. It was enough. The tension in the room was a coiled serpent, poised to strike, the air vibrating with unspoken threats. Blackwood, for all his bluster and cruelty, was a businessman first, a pragmatist when coin was involved. He weighed the glint of gold in his mind against the certainty of bloodshed if he challenged the stranger. He forced a greasy smile. 1,000 it is. She's all yours, stranger. Enjoy your purchase. But Silas knew it wasn't over. It was merely the beginning of a bloodier chapter. He walked towards Ilara, his steps measured and deliberate, ignoring the hostile glares burning into his back. He offered her his hand, calloused and strong. "Come with me, miss." She hesitated for a fraction of a second, her gaze searching his, then her small hand slipped into his. It was cold, trembling, but her grip, surprisingly, was firm. As they walked out of the saloon, leaving behind a roomful of stunned, resentful, and angry men, Silas felt the weight of his decision settle upon him, as heavy and familiar as the well-worn gun at his hip. He had just bought himself a whole heap of trouble. But as he glanced at Ilara, her head held high despite the ordeal she had endured, a fragile dignity clinging to her, he knew he wouldn't have it any other way. The wind howled outside, a mournful symphony mirroring the storm brewing within him and the one he had just deliberately unleashed upon the town. Blackwood wouldn't let this public slight, this blatant defiance, go unpunished. Silas knew men like him, their pride was as inflated as their cruelty. They found precarious refuge in a dilapidated livery stable at the edge of the decaying town, the only place that offered a semblance of privacy and defensible cover. Elara, finally safe from the leering eyes and suffocating threat of the saloon, sagged against a rough-hewn wooden beam, the adrenaline that had kept her upright finally ebbing away. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice hoarse, raw with unshed tears and unspoken trauma. "Why did you do it?" Silas, his back to her, just shrugged, meticulously checking the cylinder of his peacemaker, the familiar clicks a grim comfort. Someone had to, but the answer felt hollow, inadequate, even to him. The truth was far more complex, buried deep beneath layers of grief and self-recrimination. He was tired of running from his past, from the specter of his failures. Maybe it was time to turn and face it, even if it meant doing so vicariously, through saving others, one desperate soul at a time. He offered her his canteen without a word. "Get some rest. We leave at dawn, if we can," but dawn was a distant promise, a lifetime away. Later that night, as an uneasy quiet settled over the town, Blackwood's men came. Not with guns blazing, not at first. Their approach was more insidious, more cowardly. They tried to set the stable on fire, hoping to flush them out or burn them alive. Silas, ever vigilant, a lifetime of danger honing his senses, smelled the acrid bite of smoke, heard the insidious crackle of spreading flames before they took hold. He got Elara out just in time, the heat searing their faces, the flames licking at their heels like hungry hounds. They escaped into the labyrinthine, refuse-strewn alleys of the town, the night air suddenly filled with the triumphant shouts of their pursuers and the ominous, flickering glow of the burning stable painting the sky. The chase was on. It was during a brief, breathless respite, hidden in the crumbling shadows of an abandoned assay office, the stench of mildew and decay thick around them, that Elara revealed her secret, the truth that would irrevocably alter the course of Silas's reluctant intervention. "It's not just me they want," she said, her voice barely a breath, a fragile thread in the oppressive silence. "Not entirely." "It's this." With trembling fingers, she pulled out a small, worn leather-bound journal from a hidden pocket sewn inside her dress. "My father was a geologist. He worked for Judge Harrison, the man who supposedly owns this entire valley, the man everyone respects. My father found something terrible, something that Harrison wants to keep buried at all costs. He documented it all in here." Silas listened, his expression unchanging, but inside, the scattered pieces of the puzzle began clicking into place with chilling clarity. Blackwood wasn't just a low-life flesh peddler, he was Judge Harrison's enforcer, his loyal dog. This wasn't about a girl mistakenly sold at auction. This was bigger, far dirtier, and infinitely more dangerous. "What did he find?" Silas asked, his voice a low growl. Elara's eyes, luminous in the dim light, darkened with pain and remembered fear. "Proof. Proof that Harrison's claim to the valley, to all the mines, is fraudulent. He forged documents, silenced witnesses, murdered the rightful owners, people who had lived here for generations. My father, he tried to expose him. That's why he's dead. Harrison had him killed, made it look like an accident in the mines at the journal," she explained, her voice gaining strength with her conviction, contained her father's meticulous notes, copies of original deeds he had managed to secure, and a detailed, damning account of Harrison's systematic crimes. Blackwood was supposed to retrieve the journal from her, silencing her permanently in the process. Silas looked at the journal, then at Elara. The resilient survivor, indeed. She wasn't just a victim, she was a witness, a keeper of truth, carrying the explosive evidence like a ticking bomb. The stakes had just been raised exponentially, far beyond a simple act of rescue. It was a plunge headfirst into a dark conspiracy that reached into the highest echelons of power in this godforsaken territory. His past as a tracker, as a soldier in a war he'd rather forget, skills he had tried to bury deep within himself, were now desperately, unavoidably needed. He had wanted to escape his ghosts, to find a quiet corner of the world where they couldn't reach him, but it seemed they had finally caught up, bringing a host of new, more formidable demons with them. What he didn't know, what he couldn't possibly fathom yet, was that Judge Harrison was already aware of Silas's unexpected intervention, and the mastermind, a man renowned for his intellect and ruthlessness, was already setting a far more intricate and deadly trap for them both. The weight of the small, leather-bound journal in his hand felt heavier than any gold, heavier than the burden of his own past. Silas finally understood the true extent of the danger Ilara was in, the mortal peril they were both undeniably in now. Judge Harrison. A name spoken with hushed reverence throughout the territory, a supposed pillar of the community, a man entrusted with upholding the law. And yet, a cold-blooded killer, a thief on a grand, audacious scale. The bitter irony wasn't lost on Silas. He'd encountered wolves in sheep's clothing before, in the chaos of war, in the deceptive calm of peace. It was always the ones cloaked in respectability, shielded by power and influence, who proved to be the most dangerous, the most depraved. They had to get the journal out, into the hands of someone who could use it, someone beyond Harrison's corrupting reach. But who? In this sprawling, lawless territory, Harrison's influence was like a creeping cancer, its tendrils spread far and wide, choking the life out of justice and truth. They were cornered, trapped like rats in a maze with no exit. Blackwood's men, relentless and brutal, were systematically scouring the town, their search growing more desperate, more violent with each passing hour. Leaving the relative anonymity of the town meant crossing vast stretches of open country, making them easy targets for Harrison's hunters. Staying meant a slow, inevitable death, caught in the tightening noose of Harrison's power. Silas found himself standing at a stark moral crossroads, the path ahead obscured by shadows and uncertainty. He could attempt to negotiate with Blackwood, perhaps offer the journal in exchange for their lives, a desperate devil's bargain. But he knew, with a certainty born of bitter experience, that men like Blackwood and Harrison didn't honor deals, they only understood power and violence. Or he could fight. But fighting meant more killing, more blood staining his already weary hands. He was so tired of the killing, of the endless cycle of violence that seemed to follow him like his own shadow. He looked at Ilara, her face pale but resolute in the dim light, her eyes fixed on him with a mixture of fear and unwavering trust. That trust was a heavy burden, yet, paradoxically, a strangely comforting strength. "We can't stay here," Silas said finally, his voice grim, raspy. "Harrison will have his men watching every road, every trail out of this valley by now. He won't risk that journal getting out. It means everything to him." Ilara clutched the journal tighter to her chest, as if it were a shield. "My father died for this truth. I won't let his sacrifice be for nothing." Her quiet courage, her fierce determination, shamed his own weariness, his own desire for peace. He had intervened to save her life, but now she was asking him to fight for something far bigger than just her survival, for justice itself, a concept he had long since relegated to the realm of naive dreams. This was the moment of reckoning, the crucible in which his battered soul would be tested. Could he dredge up the remnants of the man he once was, the man who believed in something, the man who fought for what was right, not just the jaded, cynical shell who ran from his past? Or would he choose the path of self-preservation, try to spirit Ilara to some semblance of safety and let the powerful continue to crush the weak, as they always seemed to do? The ghosts of his past whispered again, their voices insistent, but this time, there was a different voice among them, Maria's, clear and strong, urging him not to falter, not to turn away. He had to make a choice, a decision that would define him, perhaps for the last time. If you were Silas, haunted by past failures, facing overwhelming odds, with the life of a brave young woman and the last flickering ember of justice in this corrupted land resting squarely in your hands, what would you do? Would you run, seeking safety in anonymity, or would you stand and fight, knowing it could very well mean your end? Tell me in the comments below what path you'd choose for Silas, what decision you believe a man like him should make. Because Silas knew, deep down in the desolate landscape of his heart, there was only one path he could truly take, the one that led directly through the cleansing fire of confrontation. He had to expose Harrison. It wasn't just about Ilara anymore, or even about his own tattered redemption. It was about all the other lives Harrison had ruined, all the others he would inevitably destroy if left unchecked, his greed insatiable. The local tyrant, Blackwood, was just a rabid dog on a strong leash. The true monster, the puppet master pulling the strings, was the one holding that leash, Judge Harrison, a man whose pervasive corruption poisoned the very land they stood on, whose influence was a blight upon the territory. The conspiracy, Silas was beginning to realize, was far deeper and more insidious than he had initially imagined. Harrison wasn't just engaged in simple land grabbing, he was methodically building an illicit empire, funded by nefarious activities meticulously shielded by his judicial robe and carefully cultivated reputation. Exposing him would be like taking on the devil himself in his own backyard. Silas made his decision, the weight of it settling in his bones, a grim resolve hardening his eyes. They would fight. Not just to survive, not just to escape, but to win, to tear down Harrison's corrupt edifice brick by bloody brick. But they couldn't do it alone, not against the entrenched power and resources of a man like the judge. He needed allies, however unlikely, however reluctant. His mind, sharp and analytical despite his weariness, raced through the possibilities. He thought of old contacts, men he'd ridden with in darker times, men who owed him favors. But most were dead, scattered to the four winds, or had chosen paths he could no longer tread. Then an unexpected name surfaced from the recesses of his memory, a disgruntled young deputy in Blackwood's pay, a man named Finn. Silas had noticed him during the degrading auction, had seen a flicker of conscience, a moment of unease in the young man's eyes as Alara was paraded before the jeering crowd. Finn had looked away, a subtle but significant gesture, enough for Silas, a keen observer of human nature, to gamble on. "There's a deputy," Silas told Alara, his voice low and urgent. "Finn. He works for Blackwood, but I don't think he's like them." "I saw something in him." Alara was understandably skeptical, her trust in anyone associated with Blackwood non-existent, but Silas's quiet conviction was a powerful force. They found Finn making his solitary rounds later that night, his face etched with a palpable unease, his uniform a poor disguise for his conflicted soul. Silas approached him carefully, not with threats or intimidation, but with the raw, unvarnished truth, with Ilara's harrowing story, with the damning evidence contained within the journal. He laid out Harrison's systematic crimes, Blackwood's calculated brutality. He spoke of justice, a word that seemed alien, almost heretical in this town ruled by fear and corruption. Finn listened, his initial fear warring visibly with a dawning, righteous anger. He'd seen things, heard whispers, ignored the gnawing disquiet in his gut for too long. He knew Blackwood was scum, a festering sore on the town. He'd taken the job out of sheer desperation, a last resort to feed his family. "What you're asking, it's suicide," Finn finally stammered, his voice trembling, his eyes darting nervously around the darkened alley. "Harrison owns this town, the whole damn territory." His untouchable Silas looked him squarely in the eye, his gaze unwavering. "Maybe. But doing nothing, standing by while evil prospers, that's a slower kind of death, isn't it? Living with yourself, knowing you let this happen, knowing you could have done something." The words, stark and true, hit their mark. Finn, it turned out, had his own deeply personal reasons to despise Judge Harrison. The judge, years ago, had callously ruined his family over a fabricated land dispute, leaving them destitute and broken. This was his chance, perhaps his only chance, to fight back, to reclaim some measure of dignity. An uneasy, fragile alliance was forged in the shadows. Finn couldn't, fight alongside them directly, not yet. The risk was too great. But he could provide vital information, a possible way out, a critical distraction. He told them about a long-forgotten secret tunnel beneath the old, abandoned church at the edge of town, a relic from a bygone era, leading out beyond the town limits, a route Harrison's men wouldn't know. He also confirmed a crucial piece of intelligence. Judge Harrison was indeed expecting the arrival of a new territorial marshal the very next day, a marshal rumored to be incorruptible, a man of integrity. This was their narrow window of opportunity. They had to get the journal to him, whatever the cost. Harrison, however, was not a man to be underestimated. Learning of Ilara's escape with the enigmatic gunslinger and shrewdly suspecting the journal was still with her, he ordered Blackwood to lock down the town completely and find them at all costs, dead or alive, preferably dead, with the journal recovered. The mastermind, usually so patient and methodical, was beginning to feel the pressure. His carefully constructed facade was at risk. He couldn't allow that journal to see the light of day. He immediately spread the word that Silas was a dangerous outlaw, a kidnapper and murderer, placing a hefty bounty on his head, turning every desperate man in town into a potential hunter. The town transformed into a deadly hunting ground. Silas, Ilara, and now with Finn's covert, invaluable help, prepared for their desperate, high-stakes gamble. Finn would create a significant diversion at the town's main gate, drawing the bulk of Blackwood's men away, while Silas and Ilara made their way to the old church and the hoped-for sanctuary of the tunnel. The plan was fraught with danger, balanced on a knife's edge. One wrong step, one unforeseen event, one betraying whisper, and it would all be over. The air crackled with a palpable, suffocating anticipation. The sun began its slow descent, painting the sky in hues of blood orange and bruised purple, casting long, ominous shadows that danced like specters. It was time. As they moved stealthily through the darkened, silent streets, every creak of a loose floorboard, every distant, drunken shout, every rustle in the alleyways, sent their hearts pounding in their chests like trapped birds. The climax was approaching, a gathering storm of bullets and blood, where their courage, their resilience, and their newfound, fragile alliance would be tested to its absolute limits. The diversion Finn orchestrated was nothing short of spectacular, a series of meticulously placed, controlled explosions at Blackwood's main warehouse on the far side of town, sending towering columns of flames and thick, acrid smoke billowing into the night sky, creating widespread panic and chaos. As Blackwood's men, startled and enraged, rushed towards the inferno, Silas and Ilara, moving like wraiths in the ensuing confusion, slipped into the deeper shadows surrounding the old, dilapidated church. The tunnel was there, exactly as Finn had described, hidden beneath a loose flagstone in the crumbling sacristy, damp, narrow, and smelling strongly of moist earth and ancient decay. It was their lifeline, their only hope. But Judge Harrison was too cunning, too experienced in the ways of desperate men. He'd anticipated a desperate move, perhaps not the tunnel itself, but he had a contingency plan in place, a final net to catch his prey. As they neared the tunnel's exit, which opened into a cluster of old ruins on the desolate outskirts of town, Blackwood and a handful of his most ruthless, loyal men were waiting. A meticulously laid trap. Judge Harrison himself stood there, a flickering lantern held high in his gloved hand, his usually composed face a mask of cold, unadulterated fury. "Did you really think it would be that easy, Gunslinger?" Harrison sneered, his voice dripping with condescension and triumph. "That journal belongs to me. And so, it appears, to your insignificant lives. The ensuing shootout was brutal, fast, and desperate, a chaotic ballet of muzzle flashes and ricocheting bullets in the pre-dawn gloom. Silas, using the crumbling stone walls of an old, roofless ruin near the tunnel exit for cover, fought with a cold, calculated fury he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years, his movements economical and deadly. Ilara, no longer a helpless damsel in distress, reloaded a spare revolver Silas had pressed into her hand earlier, her hand surprisingly steady, her eyes blazing with a fierce, unwavering defiance. Finn, having played his part in the diversion to perfection, arrived unexpectedly out of the darkness, his deputy badge now lying discarded in the dust. He had chosen his side openly and irrevocably. He laid down a surprising volume of covering fire, his shots accurate, taking down one of Blackwood's startled men. The odds evened slightly, a sliver of hope piercing the darkness. Blackwood, enraged at seeing his men fall and his authority challenged, charged Silas with a roar of pure animalistic fury. Their fight was a short, vicious whirlwind of fists and raw, desperate strength, ending when Silas, using Blackwood's own reckless momentum against him, sidestepped and sent the tyrant crashing headfirst into a jagged, protruding rock. Blackwood lay still, his reign of terror over, a bloody stain on the unforgiving ground. But Harrison remained. The judge, seeing his chief enforcer fall and his meticulously crafted plan unraveling before his eyes, pulled a hidden derringer from his coat pocket. He aimed it squarely at Ilara, his face contorted in a snarl of desperation. "The journal, girl, or you die right here." Before he could pull the trigger, a single, sharp shot echoed through the stillness. Harrison stumbled, a choked cry escaping his lips as he clutched his shoulder, his derringer clattering uselessly to the ground. Silas stood a short distance away, smoke curling lazily from the barrel of his peacemaker, his aim unerringly true. He hadn't killed him. He wanted Harrison to face justice, the real, impartial kind he himself had so often subverted. The fight was over. As the first rays of dawn broke, painting the eastern sky in delicate hues of pink and orange, the incorruptible territorial marshal, alerted by a hastily scribbled message Finn had managed to get to him hours before, rode into the now strangely subdued town. He found Judge Harrison wounded, his reputation in tatters, his extensive crimes laid bare by the meticulously kept journal Elara bravely presented as evidence. The vast conspiracy unraveled with surprising speed. Harrison's empire of deceit, built on lies and blood, crumbled into dust. Justice, slow but inexorably sure, began to grind its gears. Silas watched from the periphery, a quiet observer once more, the storm within him finally beginning to subside. He had faced his past, not by outrunning it, but by standing his ground and fighting for a future for someone else. The ghosts that haunted him were quieter now, their accusatory whispers fading. Elara approached him, the precious journal no longer a burden but a testament, clutched in her hand, soon to be vital evidence. "We did it," she said, a small, tentative but hopeful smile gracing her lips. "What will you do now?" Silas looked towards the distant horizon, at the vibrant promise of a new day dawning. The life of a gunslinger, a solitary wanderer, was all he had known for so long, but perhaps, just perhaps, it wasn't all he could be. "Maybe," he said, a rare hint of a smile touching his own lips, "it's time to find some peace." Elara's smile widened, reaching her eyes, illuminating her face. "Perhaps," she ventured softly, "we can find it together." They left the town behind, not as fugitives or outcasts, but as survivors, carrying the indelible scars of their battle but also nurturing the fragile seeds of a new beginning. They eventually found a small, secluded ranch, nestled in a hidden valley untouched by corruption and greed, a place where the earth was rich and fertile, and the water ran clear and sweet. It wasn't the oblivion Silas had once sought, but something far more precious, far more profound, a chance to build, to heal, to truly live. His long and arduous journey of redemption had led him here, to a quiet, unassuming peace he never thought possible. The shadows of his past would always linger, a part of who he was, but now, they were balanced by the warm, steady light of a hopeful future, a future shared with a resilient, courageous woman who had shown him the enduring meaning of courage and the possibility of a new dawn. Now, if you want to see what new challenges Silas and Elara might face in their hard-won peace, or perhaps explore another tale of justice hard-fought in the untamed West, click on the video on your screen. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories of courage, redemption, and the enduring, timeless fight for what's right.